Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the latest Society for the Environment Spotlight webinar. This month, we are focusing on Chartered Environmentalist registration with the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, or IMechE for short. I'm Phil Underwood. I'm the Engagement Manager at the Society for the Environment. So, in short, as a full member of IMechE, you have the opportunity to become a Chartered Environmentalist, which is also known as CEnv. Alongside your Chartered Engineer registration, you can add CEnv to demonstrate your ability to utilize your engineering skills to protect and enhance the environment. As a very simple example, a competent engineer, such as a Chartered Engineer, is required to keep a bridge standing. As a Chartered Engineer with proven environmental competence, such as a Chartered Environmentalist, you're required to ensure that that bridge has the lowest environmental impact based on sound knowledge. This doesn't mean you need to be in charge of the impact of the entire project. You can just have a focus on the efficient use of materials or waste management or logistics or air quality or engineering the design to ensure the sustainable long use of the end product, for example. Clearly, we might not be talking about bridges here, but think of things like vehicles, machinery, robotics, fuels, manufacturing, everything across the IMechE membership. To bring this Chartered Environmentalist opportunity to life, we are delighted to be joined by 3 professionals who have been through the process to achieve CEnv registration with IMechE already. So from left to right, we have Tom Bray, Finn Coyle, and Daniel Kenning, all with CEnv and CEnv after their names. They are here to tell their stories, share their insights, and to support you in your quest to showcase your environmental competence alongside your engineering competence. So at this stage, I'm going to switch to actual moving faces. You might be able to see them in the corner at the moment, but I'm going to stop sharing my slides here. There we go. So thank you very much to Daniel, Finn, and Tom for joining us. And I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves, if that's okay. And I've pre-prepared for some questions, which you've already seen. And we're going to go for what do you do and who for? In your job, where does your combined knowledge of the environment and engineering come into play? And why did you become a Chartered Environmentalist, having already achieved Chartered Engineer? So if I can go to Tom first, I'm going to hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you. Good to be here and to contribute to this. So yeah, I'm Tom Bray. I'm a carbon and energy project officer for Durham County Council, which means I develop and commission and oversee technical projects to reduce emissions across County Durham. And that includes everything from low carbon heating, whether it's installing heat pumps at leisure centres or renewable energy, installing solar farms in big fields, batteries, and everything to electric vehicles and everything in between. So my career started with 7 and a bit years at the engineering consultancy ARIP, where I was working on mechanical building design. That's my mechanical engineering background. But as I moved, kind of stayed worked at ARIP, I was moving more into the kind of low carbon building design world, which led to my current role. So I hope you can kind of see that my role being focused on climate change mitigation has relevance with both the environment and engineering. So I'm working to develop projects that would reduce emissions in my local area, and that has some kind of environmental focus and priority, but it uses my technical engineering background to understand what's possible, to come up with solutions to overcome a variety of challenges and engineering problems, and actually to help a more traditional engineer to plot a path to net zero, to use that engineering understanding, but also that environment context to plot a path to a low carbon future. So why did I choose to become a Chartered Environmentalist? Well, I guess I chose partly as career development, understanding that my work had already taken a shift away from a purely engineering role to one with a bit of a broader focus. But I also felt that being recognised as a Chartered Environmentalist on top of a Chartered Engineer would help in achieving meaningful change. It would help having a voice in that increasingly prominent conversation around the environment and around climate change. And it would help demonstrate my my competence and actually the competence and dedication of people working in the public sector and public sector officers. So all that kind of thing I saw as a really positive step in giving me a bit more weight in the conversations that I had. Back to you, Phil.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand straight back over to Finn, if that's okay, with the same questions.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Finn Coyle. I'm head of engineering for buses at TfL. And probably the crossover between the environment side of things and engineering side of things in my job started from the beginning. So I, as a graduate, joined Caterpillar as a diesel performance engineer. And what I didn't realize when I applied for that job, but I soon did when I ended up in it, is 95% of diesel engine performance engineers' work is on the number of colleagues to reduce PM. And from an engineering point of view, I really understood what technologies were needed to reduce those emissions. And then I was living in Peterborough at the time, wanted to move to London. I applied for a job, ultimately ended up working at TfL through initially the Energy Saving Trust to work on the first low emission zones that came in. And air quality, improving air quality in London was the focus of all the work we did. And I kind of realized quite early on that I understood about the emissions, but didn't really understand a bit much about the air quality. And I then really wanted to start to be able to demonstrate my understanding of that, which initially, it's the reason I applied for CEnv. Initially, I started to do a lot of CPD courses on air quality, on atmospheric chemistry, how emissions are formed, the effect of NOx emissions, the difference between NOx and NO2, all of those kind of things. And the reason I went for CEnv as well as CEng is because in my job I sort of represent TfL, and I need to speak about the emissions reduction work we're doing, and also the air quality stuff as well. And I want to be able to be seen as having the competence to be able to speak on both sides, the environmental side and on the engineering side. That's the reason for me doing both.
Magic. Thank you very much, Finn. I'm already enjoying the variety of different perspectives that we've got on this particular panel, and I'm going to probably extend that even more by asking Daniel to provide his introduction as well.
Hello, yes, hello. I'm Daniel Kenning, and I run a consultancy, engineering consultancy, delivering transition engineering services called Splendid Engineering. And I'm also co-founder of the Global Association for Transition Engineering. So the thing I do is transition engineering, really, but this comes out of my background in mechanical engineering. And really my background was first of all in mechanical engineering at Ford Motor Company. I spent about 9 years there as a new product development engineer, but then in 1996, I realized that actually sustainability is a much bigger challenge than more family saloon cars. So I started focusing on that. I've worked in industry, obviously in manufacturing, and the built environment for a building services consultancy as a sustainability consultant. I've worked for charities, renewable energy charities, and a great little local charity helping vulnerable people keep warm in poor quality housing in winter. So I've had quite a wide experience, and I would say that environmental issues impact everywhere on engineering issues, because engineers tend to work inside industry, inside the economy, which depends absolutely on society, which depends absolutely on the environment. So part of my work actually is to try and get people to stop thinking about the environment as an external issue and start seeing it as an existential issue. And in fact, my definition of sustainability that I use is the capacity to continue. And I see if we don't get the environmental sustainability right, then everything that we do will not be able to continue. So we'll have a sticky end. And the reason I chose to seek registration as a chartered environmentalist as well as a chartered engineer was really recognition. By then I was working outside of industry as an independent engineer, and it's important to be able to demonstrate your credibility up front. So that's why Chartered Environmentalist tells people that I know what I'm talking about. Chartered Engineer tells people that I know how machines work, I know how engineered systems work. And I don't know if you can see, there's another one there. It says EUR-ING in front of my name. I'm a registered European engineer as well. So that tells people that I'm quite comfortable working in other countries, thanks to my background with languages and working in Spain, Germany, France, and so on. So it's all about showing people that you know what you're talking about so they can trust you to solve their actual problems.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Daniel. And I think you've certainly in parts answered my first question that I'm going to throw out there. I've got questions written down that I'm going to go through, but these are alongside hopefully some questions from the audience as well. So a quick reminder, if you have any questions about what the panelists have done in the past, how they've managed to piece together their experience to become CEng and CEnv, and whatever questions that might be, whether it's about their particular areas of expertise, the industries they work in, any of that. If you have questions around that, pop it in the Q&A section on your toolbar, and we'll do our best to answer those questions. But I'm going to continue with some of my questions, if that's okay. So the first one was, what do IMechE members have to do with the environment? And I'm asking that because we had a pre-discussion about what we should ask, and we thought that might be a good one to start off with. And the bit that's in those introductions that stuck in my mind is low emissions zones, which Finn's ears just pricked up. So I'm going to hand over to Finn. What do IMechE members have to do with the environment?
Yeah, I mean, in automotive side that I can speak for everything really, because there's such an environmental impact to transport. So the crossover is huge, and low emission zones. It feels like when I first joined Transport for London, the whole focus was on particulate matter emissions, the black stuff coming out of diesel engines, very carcinogenic, very bad for health. And then focus moved on to NOx emissions. But even now, when we're moving away to zero emissions, there's still huge. I used to think electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles would be, well, electric vehicles especially would be a bit boring as someone who spent his career developing diesel engines. But now, even now, when we're moving over to zero emissions, our job's still huge focus on the environment, because you can't just have a battery electric vehicle and plug it in and say, there you go, I've done everything, I don't need to do anything more. The environmental impact of the batteries and how they're mined and where they come from, the environmental impact of cobalt that goes into the batteries and all the ethics around that. The grid mix of, if you plug in your car to charge it, where's that energy coming from? The UK is getting quite good now, but 10 years ago, there was a kilowatt hour of electricity. There's quite a lot of CO2 associated with that. Now that we're moving over to hydrogen, where we have a number of hydrogen buses, where that hydrogen comes from is huge. You have to be able to do those calculations and work out the well-to-wheel CO2 emissions of that, because if you buy reformed hydrogen from natural gas, that can end up being worse in terms of CO2 than a diesel bus. So you really need to understand the wider impact of these things, because otherwise you could just be implementing what you thought were sustainable solutions, and in actual fact there is a lot of environmental disbenefits. So I'd encourage anyone in my team to become a chartered environmentalist and really understand this stuff in a lot more detail, because the crossover to me, they're both in the particular role I have now, I think they're both as important as each other. You need to understand the technology, and you need to understand the sustainability side and environmental impact side.
Brilliant. And just to pick up on some of that, I guess a huge part of what you've mentioned there is continued learning, because you mentioned that diesel buses is what you were that was your area of expertise, and then I guess the requirements from TfL changes as they progress towards a more low carbon options that they have at their disposal or want to have at their disposal. And your learning as part of, which has to become as part of your CEnv registration, that must help you quite a lot.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's very important. I mean, the kind of thing that could happen, we were presenting to a number of the key stakeholders, the whole bus industry, about our strategy for moving over to zero emissions. And I think my director of buses was up presenting at the time, and then someone asked a difficult question about cobalt in the battery. And all of a sudden, right, Finn, you need to answer that. And the whole audience turns around and I'm landed with this difficult kind of question. You need to do it. And the continued, I think the CPD aspect of both the IMechE and the CM side of things are very important as well. If I had just stayed a diesel engine emissions engineer, I'd be looking for a different job, because it feels like we haven't bought a new diesel bus in TfL for, I don't know, the last maybe 3 years or something like that. So I'm quite there's a lot to the rollout of sustainable vehicles, and there's a lot to learn on them, which is some part of it I'm really enjoying.
So being able to transition your skills towards the newer technology and that kind of thing, and developing that kind of thing yourself, has been very vital for your job by the sounds of it. Good. Tom, you mentioned quite a broad range of projects that you look at within your role, from solar farms to I can't remember the other things. There was a lot of other things, wasn't there? But so how, in your role, how does what does your mechanical engineering knowledge, how does that fit into what you do, which is quite an environmentally focused role now, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I'll just pick up a little bit on that CPD story. So one of the things that engineers are guilty of is saying, we know how to solve this problem, and therefore I know what I'm doing. I'm experienced. I can do this. I don't need to change. But actually, my focus is on CO2 emissions and the climate emergency and responding to the climate emergency. With that as a challenge, it says business as usual isn't appropriate anymore. We need to do something different. CPD is so essential. So if it's an engineer that's been doing something the same for 20 years, then that's actually quite a big challenge to them, that says you're no longer relevant almost, and you need to rethink about how you do things. And I need to be better at communicating that sometimes, I think. But that's one of the conversations I have regularly. And so for me, understanding what a traditional system is, and it could be a system like a heating system for a leisure centre, how that works and what the implications of the engineering design are of that system, and then being able to understand the technical solution. So what the mechanical engineering is around how a heat pump works, and what that needs to change around how we distribute heat and water around a building. I think, that understanding of what the real engineering, the technical solution is to a problem, but also seeing what the future and the solution could be to reduce emissions. Those two things are really key for in my role. So understanding how a mechanical system would work, and therefore how we can take it apart to rebuild it is a lower carbon system, is really important. And I'd probably suggest that if you look at the front page of the IMechE website and the industries that we cover, it's very broad. If I think back to my degree and my best pals in my degree who did the same modules as me and the different jobs that we went into, it's very broad. A mechanical engineer could be anything, and it's a degree in problem solving in many ways. But if we look at all those different industries, to some extent, I see a lot of the causes of climate change, whether it's the excellent drilling engineers that we have in oil and gas, the excellent aerospace engineers that we have that have got absolutely fantastic gas turbine engineers, all this kind of stuff, power engineers, industrial engineers, process engineers. That traditionally we might have caused an awful lot of emissions, but understanding those processes, being the experts in those fields, we're the ones that have to be able to see the solutions that are going to change those things. And so I see a huge opportunity for that kind of environmental focus in the future of mechanical engineers' careers and the rest of our work life, to say, I understand how to do this, so let's make a change and do it in a different way. Because we are experts in fluid management, in thermodynamics, in how heat moves, in how processes work, and we really do have the skills to change those systems. I don't think I answered your question, Phil, but I went on a bit of a preach, so there you go.
That's quite all right. You've got the microphone. You feel free to carry on. Not a problem at all. It's fair to say that the change between what some would see maybe as the traditional side of mechanical engineering to the demands of the environmental challenges we have now, which are at the forefront of lots of agendas. That seems to be quite a theme that we're going through with this. And so I'm going to come to Daniel with the next question, if that's okay. And Daniel, feel free to chip on that last question as well. But what does the proven environmental competence that CEnv gives you, what does that enable you to do as an engineer?
Okay, well, the thing that enables me and other engineers who are CEnvs to do, that maybe we and our predecessors didn't do before, is to bring about change to the whole system based on to solve the difficult problems which exist now that didn't exist before. And by that I mean, if anyone has been to an IMechE lecture, you'll know that there's a Splendid lecture theatre, and there used to be paintings of grandee former engineers going back to George Stephenson along the walls, and you can see a lovely painting of the engineer who worked on innovating trains, and the engineer who worked on diesel engines, and the engineer who worked on jet engines. And it suddenly occurred to me that all of our previous generations of engineers have been able to deliver more benefits to society, but with more and more resources, particularly energy, whatever kind of energy it is. And it occurred to me that the point of history we find ourselves in at the moment is that our challenge is to work out that with less resources in the future, with constraints on resources, we still have to work out how to deliver enough benefits to society. So the challenge is changing. It's a wicked problem. I think either Finn or Tom was saying that, you know, the engineering systems work. Trains work, airplanes work, cars work. They do great things. They've got fantastic suspension systems, really good sound systems. Education works, healthcare, it all works, but then at the same time it doesn't work because we're messing up the atmosphere, we're polluting all the environment, and those problems are going to come back. And this is a wicked problem because it's not a simple problem like how to make this vehicle lighter or faster or use less petrol. It's how can we make the whole system do what society needs it to do in a changing set of future constraints. No engineers have had to do that before. And it's only by really understanding the links between engineering and the environment that we can even start to do that. So, you know, having a competence in the environment really, really helps. To the extent, I would say one of the most useful things I've done was I taught a diploma in environmental management, and there was a module on ecology. So I had to learn about ecology, and, you know, I recommend that to anybody. So, yeah, understanding the environment is critically important to helping us address this wicked problem.
Has the registration for you personally in your independent, I suppose, am I right to say consultancy role that you have now, has that helped you with clients and so on?
Well, it's difficult to say exactly, but I think yes. Every now and then I get a bit of feedback, you know, and it does help you to be listened to a bit. It helps you to be taken a bit seriously and talk to the right people. So yes, it definitely does help.
Good. And Finn, apart from being put on the spotlight by somebody at a conference because of your environmental expertise, how is that proven environmental competence helped you?
Yeah, I think massively, actually, because speaking of conferences and explaining what TfL is doing from the environmental side is something I have to do a lot, because we have to get a lot of funding for zero emission buses and everything else. And I'll give you another example. When I was presenting, I think I was at a conference that was all engineers. I was talking about what we're doing in Euro 6 or retrofit to the Euro 6 standard. But then I had a slide on our future. We're going to move to zero emissions and this electric buses and everything else. And then someone stood up saying, "Oh, all you're doing with electric buses is moving the problem somewhere else. That's all you're going to do." And that's you'll hear Jeremy Clarkson and the likes of that saying that as well. And then I had to, because I had done air quality modeling at a university as a CPD course, and I think that module was part of the master's. I was able to explain, that the power station, see, with the huge stack, by the time that gets to ground level, the concentrations are so low, the health impact's tiny. It's completely different than an exhaust in the centre of London. So I said, explain that bit for a start. And then talk about, okay, yeah, so some power stations do use, they used to use coal or they used to use natural gas, but overall in the grid mix, or electric buses at the time would have been half the amount of the diesel buses. So it's just to be able to justify reasons for the technology strategy you're doing. I find that's very important. And I think you can't, if you're representing TfL, it would be quite nice to say, sorry, I'm an engineer, I'm not going to answer that question or whatever else. But in general, you get asked a complete range of questions. And I think for me, a bit like Daniel said, being able to sort of having the CN kind of gives people an assurance, you know what you're talking about and that kind of side. And I think that's very important as well.
This might not be something that you were looking to do at the time, but if you wanted to have that a bit more exposure and influence to be pointed at, to give those kind of insights, I guess the CEnv registration would potentially allow you to do that, because you're seen as that environmental expert and people will start to ask you those questions directly. And if you were looking for extra exposure to, get your name out there a little bit more, if you're looking for a different job and that kind of thing, that might be quite useful to you, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Very much agree with that.
I have noticed that we've got a question in the Q&A, which is to do with guidance and mentoring for the application process. And I have seen it, but we're going to get to that. So we'll come back to that in a few moments' time, if that's okay. And actually, in fact, my next question is, I think you've pretty much covered it now. Do you see mechanical engineers and related disciplines playing a large role in tackling the current and future environmental challenges? I think it's fair to say that from your answers so far, that was probably unanimous yes. But I'm going to put Tom on the spot and see if you wanted to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think absolutely. We talked about it in our pre-call a little bit, but and I really recommend people that are watching this, listening to this, to Google the ICE presidential address from 2021. I think it was 2021, Rachel Skinner, and it's this call to action for civil engineers and actually all engineers to show up and to be the solution to the environmental problems that we have at the moment, particularly around climate change. And I heard that and I thought, yeah, come on, let's do that. Engineers are responsible for this. We have the solutions to this. Without engineers, we don't have any response to climate change. And so yeah, I'd love the IMechE to be having that conversation with our members as well and saying, in our industries that we are embedded in, that we are the experts in, that as Daniel said, that we keep running in an excellent manner. What are we going to do about it? Where are we going to see the step change in CO2 emissions in each of those industries? How are we going to provoke that? How are we going to say to our financial directors, no, we need to change? If that hits our profit or if that needs investment, we need to change. We need to do it quickly. And then to say to engineers, yeah, if that's the challenge, if we need to reduce emissions by half by 2030 and by 100% by a later date, then how are we going to do it? You come up with the solutions. If you have a degree in problem solving and your experience is in solving these challenges, then what are you going to do, and how are you going to solve that wicked problem that, as Daniel mentioned?
Absolutely. And from the Society for the Environment point of view, we want those decisions for that transition to a more sustainable world, those decisions to be made by those who have the proven competencies to be able to showcase that they can make the decisions, the correct decisions. They might not always be 100% right, but they have good knowledge and good experience behind them that's proven to be able to make informed decisions to help to protect and enhance the environment. And we want that to be a huge part of the Chartered Environmentalist registration, as it is with the Chartered Engineering registration. Let's not forget that it's to prove your competency in engineering, that is key. And we certainly see a Chartered Environmentalist registration in a very, very similar way. And the two combined, well, the possibilities are endless, aren't they?
Phil, can I add to that the answer given by Tom on
please
that?
Do.
Please. Yep. This was the question about mechanical engineers addressing current environmental challenges. I think one of the ways in which we can do this is that I mentioned a bit before about the challenges are about constraints, and we've had a long time in which engineering has been possible in an unconstrained decision-making environment. We've been able to enjoy more and more abundant and affordable energy and material resources. So we've made decisions in one particular way, but now we have constraints, and there's a difference, and it's not widely talked about. People still talk about the environment as an external issue. So you run your very successful global corporation or SME, and then the environmental issues are an external thing that you've got to deal with to look good or to win customers. But it's not just like that. These are constraints, and engineers know how to design a system to work within constraints. And if you give engineers one more constraint, you just add it to your list of constraints, and we can make the system work. And one of them might be, from my automotive background, that if we need to reduce emissions, you can't just make the car lighter. You can't just substitute for petrol, biodiesel or something or batteries instead. You have to look at things like car sharing instead of car ownership. And that's a non-engineering change. And us engineers, we have to be humble and say, there is no technological panacea, but when you've done the non-engineering changes, like shared cars, you then have a situation where a manufacturer might have to work out how to run a viable business selling 80,000 cars a year instead of 800,000 cars a year. And at that point, you have to reassess every single engineering decision because the product will be completely different. So we have to get used as engineers to working with lots of other disciplines and adapting the engineering to suit non-engineering changes that have to happen as well.
I think that collaboration message is at the end there is highly important, and is one of the core reasons why the Chartered Environmentalist registration is available to so many different disciplines. Whether you're an engineer, mechanical, civil, or structural, whatever it might be, or whether you're an ecologist or a water manager, or I'm going to run out of things to say, but architects, and they're all. You can be a Chartered Environmentalist, which kind of brings those disciplines together in a way, because you have a singular a shared objective to make a difference in the role and your future ambitions. So thinking about the opportunities that are available to maybe IMechE members, and I'm going to come to Finn for this one. If you're currently working in a role which doesn't necessarily support environmental objectives and so on, and you don't really have a way of currently gaining Chartered Environmentalist registration. Are there routes available, do you think, now with the change in focus, with the challenges that we have, for them to learn and to develop their environmental roles, to become more of an environmental engineer, I guess?
Yeah, I would think so. So certainly in TfL, I think the only thing higher up the two things very high in the agenda are sustainability and safety. We have the mayor has a vision zero, and then we have pure sustainability, and they are the two core drives for everything we do. And even the buses directorate have these pillars and as customer, and then green is in there. It's a complete change now. I'm actually finding it hard to think of a sector of engineering where you wouldn't have sustainability as a big focus of it. So I definitely think there is, and then it may well be that there's some operational type roles that in the past haven't done that, but if you demonstrated you had an interest in it, I think that it'd be only too happy for you to pick up some of that sustainability objectives that they have to meet in order to do that. So absolutely, yeah, certainly in TfL, I think there would be, and I can't, yeah, and there's lots of courses out there that the IMechE do, as well as a lot of the universities. So if you can get funding for training in your company, you can go off and do a lot of interesting courses that'll help you demonstrate the competence you need to in your interview to be a chartered environmentalist.
Brilliant. Before we go on to talk about your experience of the application process and registering, I just got one last question, which again we talked about when we had our pre-meeting, which is about what jobs are relevant for a chartered environmentalist. I think it's Tom that brought it up initially, that you had colleagues, I believe, who weren't sure if they could be a chartered environmentalist because they didn't have a carbon or an environment in their job title and that kind of thing. And obviously we're talking to an audience here of mechanical engineers, many of which probably won't have environment in their job title and so on, but clearly they can become chartered environmentalists. So from your experience, Tom, who would you see who could be a chartered environmentalist? Is there limitation?
Well, yeah, as someone whose job title was carbon and energy projects officer, I was a bit unsure about whether I could be a chartered environmentalist, and the answer is yes, I guess. And the challenge that came back to me was actually from my sponsor as part of the process, who's a data center design lead, not a traditionally environment focused role, but said, actually, I aspire my work to be of such high quality, to having such a good environmental impact that I could also apply for this in the future. And I think that said quite a lot for his integrity in many ways, but also for all of us, if in whatever role that we have, there's definitely a self-labeling that we say, actually, I'm working at a level here that is really contributing positively to the environment. I'm happy to say to myself, I feel qualified and competent enough to be a chartered environmentalist. So I don't think there's a specific job role or an industry that would lead to it, but it could be really broad.
Before I ask Daniel the same question, I'm going to pick up on one thing you mentioned there, based on the question that we've had in the Q&A, which is around, did you guys have any particular resources or guidance or mentoring when going through the application process? And you mentioned a sponsor there. How did the sponsor come about, and what were they able to support you with?
Yeah, so I guess you need two sponsors as part of the process. There's the application process, the IMechE, that I think tend to be chartered engineers that can sign off on what you're saying is true, I guess. And one of them for me was a former colleague who I'd worked with, Arup, who actually had been my sponsor for my chartered engineer status as well. And I felt, let's continue the process there. But it was someone that has walked with me a lot throughout my career, knows me, seen the work that I've done, and was really happy to support that as a sponsorship process. So probably less as a kind of resourcing, but more as a wider kind of career mentor. That role was happening.
So if you've got that kind of colleague available to you who've gone through similar kind of processes, then in answer to the question, and we'll come back to the question as well to delve into that a bit more, but that might be a good avenue to go down initially to see if any of your colleagues are able to support you in that way. I'm going to revert back to relevant jobs for chartered environmentalists and environmental professionals, and hand over to Daniel to see if he's got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, my thought is roughly the same as what Tom was saying, that most anybody could become registered as a chartered environmentalist. And what I have noticed is that the people who are really good at sustainability and the whole environmental issue aren't people who've had that job given to them, but they're people who've responded to their life and stimulus and have stepped forward to be agents of change. They're driven individuals, a lot of people I've met. And I think whatever your job role is, if you look around you and you can see that change is needed and that we need to do something about this unsustainable mess that the whole world is in, then actually you are the person to do it. There's that thing, isn't there? We are the people who we have been waiting for. So if you feel that you need to do something, then I would say, rather than waiting for someone else, then you step forward, find the training and follow that path and just become a chartered environmentalist. I mean, I was actually at the end of a 5-year engineering program when I first heard the word sustainability a very long time ago, and I received a letter in the post from the Centre for Alternative Technology in Wales with an advertisement for their short courses. At the same time, it's a personal note here, at the same time I received a letter from my dad who said, you must follow your instincts. And I had these two pieces of information in my hand. So I immediately booked a course at the Centre for Alternative Technology. And it was the first time I'd ever been there. And it was a course in how to build a wind turbine. And that was the start of the journey, really. So just start the journey, I would say. And it doesn't matter actually what your job title is.
Well, I'm going to snip that rousing message and put it on our social media channels to get more people to watch this webinar. So that's always useful to gain that kind of content as well. So thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the registration experience that you had in terms of your application and the process around that to become a chartered environmentalist. Daniel, I know you went for a slightly different route a number of years ago, which is not available now. So now I'm going to focus on Finn and Tom for this one. So a very broad question, but Finn, how did you find the application process?
I find it very straightforward, actually. And I won't name other societies' names, but at the time when I applied, 2016, I think I applied, and I became chartered in 2017. I had colleagues going through a different society to become chartered environmentalists because I was in TfL's environment team. And they were finding it a struggle and really difficult. But when I found out the IMechE would do it in addition to the Chartered Engineering, I looked at that one, and the guidance is very good, and the form is very straightforward. I think certainly for me, all those years ago when I went to the IMechE to become a chartered engineer, I found the interview quite hard, and initially I found filling in the form quite hard. And I think there was a lot riding on it for me because I needed to move up a grade and become a chartered engineer to get my extra salary. So probably I was a bit stressed. But by the time I did the Chartered Environmentalist application, the form is very, very similar. The structure is very similar, and the guidance around it is very, very straightforward. So maybe I was lucky in that a lot of my work that I demonstrated to become a chartered engineer was around engine and emissions and things like that. But I think I managed to answer the environmental questions quite easily, actually. And so I found the process very straightforward. Clearly, you need to dedicate a bit of time. The hardest thing is getting around to, once you get started, the hardest thing is getting started. But definitely, I think, we can be critical for the IMechE for a lot of things, one thing I think is very good are their sort of guidance notes and the structure they put in place for these applications.
Brilliant. And one thing I'm going to pick up on there, you said you one of the benefits is potentially higher pay and that kind of thing. I'm going to throw a stat out there that through one of our member bodies, the Institution of Environmental Sciences, they did a survey a couple of years ago now, so it is a couple of years old, but their Chartered Environmentalist members generally, on average, earned 33% more than their non-Chartered Environmentalist members. So a little bit of a carrot, maybe.
Okay.
I'm going to come to Tom for your experiences of your application process.
Yeah, I'd say really similar things to Finn. I went through the process 2020, 2021. So I probably had some spare time for myself on the back of the pandemic, etc. I would say if you've been through the MPDS process to become a chartered engineer, or if you've become a chartered engineer recently, then this process is very similar. It's a series of competence based questions and proving from your experience to filling out a form with a limited word count. But it's the kind of thing that you've done if you've been through the chartered engineer process. The guidance notes that go alongside the application form are very, very similar. It did take quite a while for my application to kind of be processed, and I think that was probably, again, a pandemic related thing that systems were struggling for all of us, during those times. But yeah, it was very simple, and then you kind of booked in with for a more or less an hour long conversation, and it's similar to the chartership process. It's a conversation between peers with some other chartered engineers or chartered environmentalists that just basically trying to understand your level of understanding and competence. And really enjoyable process, really nice conversation with two IMechE members. It takes some time, but actually it's a very accessible process. And the content on the IMechE website, although there's not a huge amount of support, I think it's sufficient enough to help you, guide you through what you need to do.
And the guidance notes that you've both mentioned, they're the IMechE guidance notes on their website, which are freely available by the sounds of it. Is that right? Yeah. Excellent. So, and that website, I've got it on a slide later on, but it's imeche.org/CEnv. And you'll be able to find all the details on there. You can even find some case studies of chartered environmentalists on there as well. So it's a good place to start. And giving them a call might be useful as well. But have a look on the website. There's plenty of stuff on there. Tom, you mentioned your sponsor. Finn, was there any other mentoring or support you were able to gain from maybe your colleagues or other chartered environmentalists that have gone through the process?
Yeah, so I think the IMechE will offer, the always offer actually to review the application before you formally submit it. I don't think I took that up, to be honest, but that is there for people to do. I managed to, I think I had to have two sponsors, one of whom had to be a chartered environmentalist. So I think I got my manager as a chartered engineer, and I went to someone else in TfL's environment team to be my mentor. So I managed to do it. But if anyone I'm happy to mentor people if people want to contact me. So there is people out there. But yeah, you need a CEnv, as far as I remember, to sign off your form as well.
That makes sense. Daniel, I wondered if the EESG are able to support in any way, maybe not directly, but there's a lot of expertise within there. Did you want to have a few words about that?
Yeah, well, sure. Yeah. Well, EESG is the Energy, Environment and Sustainability group within IMechE. So there are different special interest groups. There's rail, aerospace, and lots of others. And EESG is actually the second biggest. Something like 20% of all IMechE members are members of the group. So that's about, I think it's about 20,000 people. And And yes, that's where we encourage anyone interested in environment and sustainability who's a member of IMechE to engage. And so there are a number of people. There's a board of about 18 people, and a number of us are chartered environmentalists. So if we were asked to be mentors, I'm sure I or my colleagues would be happy to help. And I mean, it's certainly worth getting, even apart from that, it's worth getting in touch just to network with other people who've got a similar interest. And we do like a nearly monthly webinar, and I'm doing one in July on greenwash. And then we have an all-day event in December, and we have our David Mackay Memorial Lecture. And we always have a good speaker, and it's a good day. So you can join that as well.
Fantastic. Well, if nothing else, it sounds like a good opportunity for CPD, that's for sure. In terms of the application process, again, is there anything else that you would like to add, Tom, Finn, Daniel, about the application and process itself? Any top tips that you might have to anyone thinking about doing it? Open to anyone who wants to jump in there, and please do, otherwise I'll sit here in silence.
I would say, I mean, for some people on the webinar, maybe they don't know other chartered environmentalists. I think it's, if you find one of them within your organization or somewhere else to begin with, because you might be surprised at how much of your current jobs or work you can demonstrate your environmental experience in and build on it. So that to me would be, because we had a big environment team in TFL, I had plenty of resource to be able to do that. So I had discussions with them to begin with, because slightly different demonstrating your environmental competence to your engineering competence. And so, yeah, if that would be the first thing I would do, is to look for someone you know and get a bit of guidance and have those discussions to help you build up your form and demonstrate your competence.
Yeah, and I'd make a point about those competencies, and that's that if you are already a chartered engineer, or even if you're looking at that process as well, the set of competencies are remarkably close. They're not exactly the same, obviously, but they are so close that a number of organizations that I'm talking to are working on how you can integrate the CEnv and CEng competencies, so that at some time in the future, you should be able to register as both at the same time. So, I mean, that it tells you that there's not an enormous difference between the two.
Quite right. And I've got a slide coming up that'll explain that a little bit more. Tom, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, not particularly. I think, yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. Just hot air if I added it.
Marvelous. That's fine. That's fine. And I'm going to just share a few slides in terms of the how to become a chartered environmentalist via IMechE. So bear with me. I won't say bye to everyone just yet. So for a start, a little bit about how the Society for the Environment fits into this conversation. So our core role is to hold the register for competent environmental professionals who have met and continue to meet a level of competence in their environmental work and their overall professionalism. There are currently over 7,500 environmental professionals known as our registrants. And I hope that many of you watching over the next few months or weeks or potentially years will follow in their footsteps. We do all of this in partnership with 24 currently professional bodies who are known as our member bodies, and one of those member bodies is IMechE. So that's where the link happens. There are actually 3 different professional registrations that the Society for the Environment regulate. There's the Registered Environmental Technician, or REnTech, Registered Environmental Practitioner, REnP, and the Chartered Environmentalist, CEnv. These registrations are kind of positioned in a progressional way. So as an example, an RFP might be as an RFP, you can use that as a demonstration of a solid commitment towards gaining your Chartered Environmentalist registration in the future. But for this particular webinar, we are purely focused on the Chartered Environmentalist registration because that's the registration that IMechE offer to their members. So they don't currently offer the RFTech or RFP registrations. So it's a bit of background information for you really on that. So those 24 professional bodies that I mentioned, this is them. So they are key for you to becoming a Chartered Environmentalist or RFTech or RFP, because in order to apply and in order to continue as a Chartered Environmentalist, you must be a member of one of these professional bodies to be able to do all of that, essentially. A member at their required level, whatever that might be, it changes between each professional body. So you don't apply directly with the Society for the Environment. In this instance, you would apply via the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. So if you're more familiar with the Engineering Council model, it's very, very similar. So you don't have to change much of the wording to be able to see where the linkages are there. So that creates the link there. So to clarify, if you wanted to become a Chartered Environmentalist, you would have to be a member of one of these professional bodies. Okay, so in order to expand on who can apply as a mechanical engineer, you must be a Chartered Engineer member or an Incorporated Engineer member or a IMechE fellow in order to apply. So you have to go through that process first. And then the application process itself is pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward in terms of the process. What you put down on paper might not be quite as simple, but that depends on your area of expertise. So for a start, you can request your application form from IMechE themselves. So the email address is on your screen there. You would need to meet the Chartered Environmentalist competencies via the application form. And the competencies have been mentioned a few times during our discussions today, and I'll get that there on the next slide, so bear with me. You'll need to complete a professional review interview, and when you're successful, you'll sign the Society's Code of Professional Conduct. You'll also have signed the IMechE Code of Conduct, but you'd have already done that, so that's not to worry about. And you don't need to complete the relevant payments to IMechE. So that's the process in short form, essentially. There's a few review elements and that kind of thing, but that's the general process. The headline competencies, and I'm not going to go through them all individually, but there are 12 competencies, but there are 4 headlines within which they sit. So you're basically looking at your application of knowledge, your environmental leadership, your communication in various forms, and your personal commitment to those professional standards. It's worth noting that you may have already met the majority of the C and D elements, certainly within your Chartered Engineer registration. So that it's certainly worth reviewing that application, and you should be able to transfer certainly some of those elements across. And I think Finn said during his talk that he used a lot of his engineering examples for his CEnv application, and he took out he brought forwards the environmental elements of those projects to basically switch them out. And that's perfectly fine because he's an engineer and he's an environmental professional as well. So the two combine. So that is the general process and requirements of how to become a Chartered Environmentalist with IMechE. If you have any questions on that process, again, feel free to put them in the Q&A in your toolbar. Very happy to answer them. We're running out of time a little bit, but don't let that put you off. Put those questions in there and we'll certainly do our best to answer them. I mentioned this website earlier on as well, imeche.org/CEnv. Head there to find out some more information. You can also find more information on the Society for the Environment website, but specific to IMechE, that's the place to go. And so whilst we wait for any questions that might come in, I just wanted to reiterate part of what I said before about the Chartered Environmentalist community. So a key question for us is, who makes the environmental decisions in a mechanical engineering setting and all of the other settings that we cover. And beyond that, who makes the environmental decisions across all sectors. Say you're a chartered environmentalist via IMechE, you have a high level of environmental competence. That puts you on par with 7,500 other chartered environmentalists from a vast range of sectors and roles and all the way across the world. So all of that evidence-based decisions with proven competence and professionalism is highly valuable for a more sustainable way of living, essentially. You'll be part of a global community of professionals who have committed to use their expertise to address environmental challenges and progress opportunities that come about. And the CEnv registration brings you all together, and we think that is massively important. And we'll hope that you'll join us on that journey. And through that, I haven't seen any questions come in the chat, so I will suggest bringing this webinar to a close with a huge thank you to Daniel, to Finn, and to Tom for your time and your insights. The recording of this webinar will be available afterwards, so you can look back at some of the parts you may have missed because you're jotting down lots of notes because of the very useful insights that you've heard today. So thank you very much to all three of you, and thank you very much to everyone for joining us for this webinar, and we'll hopefully speak to you again soon.